Naval Air Station Miramar, California, March 1970. The mess hall holds 240 men at full capacity, and at 1200 hours on a Thursday in March, it is operating at full capacity. The long metal tables arranged in parallel rows beneath fluorescent lights that turn everything, the specific institutional color that military installations turn things, which is a color somewhere between gray and green, that exists nowhere in nature and exists only in places where function has completely replaced aesthetics as the organizing principle of space, where the walls are cinder block painted the same gray-green and the floor is linoleum in a pattern designed to hide dirt rather than be beautiful. And the sound is the sound of 240 men eating together in a space designed to feed them efficiently rather than comfortably. The clatter of metal trays on metal tables and the specific low roar of mass conversation that happens when that many people are talking simultaneously in a confined space. And the smell is the smell of institutional food prepared in bulk, which is not quite the smell of food prepared in homes, but something adjacent to it, something that contains the same basic elements but has been scaled and systematized in a way that changes its nature. And the men eating are Marines, which means they are eating quickly and efficiently because this is how Marines eat, with the specific focused energy of people who understand that eating is fuel rather than entertainment, that the meal exists to serve the mission rather than the mission existing to produce the meal. And they are young men mostly, 18 to 25, some of them recently back from Vietnam, and some of them recently assigned here, and some of them waiting to ship out. And they are loud because they are young and they are together, and they are in a space where being loud is permitted within limits. And the limits are not written anywhere, but everyone knows them, because everyone has learned them the same way all people learn the unwritten rules of spaces, which is by observation and by consequence. And the consequence for violating the unwritten rules of a Marine Corps mess hall is swift and clear, and has never required explanation. Bruce Lee enters through the main doors at 12:07, 7 minutes after the rush has begun and 17 minutes before it will peak, carrying an empty metal tray and wearing civilian clothes, which is the first thing that marks him as different in a space where everyone else is in camouflage utilities or service dress, a simple button-down shirt and dark slacks and civilian shoes, moving through the entrance with the specific quality of someone who is aware they are entering a space that is not designed for them but has been invited into it, and is navigating the distance between those two facts, between being invited and belonging, which are not the same thing and never have been. And his presence registers immediately with the men nearest the door in the way that anything different registers in a space that operates on sameness. The specific noticing that happens when pattern is interrupted, when the eye encounters something it was not expecting to encounter and has to recalibrate. And the noticing spreads through the room in the particular way that information spreads through a crowd. Not all at once, but in sequence, a ripple moving outward from the point of disturbance. And most of the men notice and then return to their meals because noticing and caring are not the same thing. But some of them continue to notice, continue to watch, because the presence of a civilian in a military mess hall during meal hours is unusual enough to warrant sustained attention, unusual enough to be a thing that might develop into a thing worth watching. And Bruce Lee is aware of being noticed in the way that anyone who is different in a uniform space is aware of being noticed, which is completely, but his awareness does not change how he moves, does not make him hurried or defensive or apologetic. He simply moves through the space the way he moves through all spaces with economy and purpose, joining the line for food with his empty tray, waiting his turn the way everyone waits their turn, and the men serving food behind the counter give him the same portions they give everyone else, and he thanks them the way anyone thanks people who serve them food. and he moves down the line collecting a meal that is identical to every other meal being served in this room at this hour. And when his tray is full, he turns to find a place to sit in a room where every seat is claimed or about to be claimed, scanning the long tables for an opening, for a space that will accommodate him without requiring anyone to move. Because requiring people to move in a space where you are already marked as different is a calculation that everyone who has ever been different in a uniform space understands instinctively. The specific mathematics of trying not to make your difference more disruptive than it already is. Corporal James Mitchell is 24 years old and has been in the Marine Corps for 3 years and 2 months, which is long enough to have developed the specific quality of institutional confidence that comes from having survived the parts of an institution that are designed to break people and having emerged unbroken. The confidence of someone who has learned the rules and learned how to operate within them, and has begun to believe that operating within the rules successfully is the same thing as being right, which is a belief that many people develop in many institutions, and which is always wrong, but rarely feels wrong to the person holding it. And he is sitting at a table with 5 other men, all of them corporals or lance corporals, all of them in utilities, all of them eating with the focused efficiency that Marines eat with. And he sees Bruce Lee moving through the mess hall with a tray, and he sees immediately that Bruce Lee is not a Marine, sees the civilian clothes and the civilian haircut, and the specific quality of movement that marks someone as outside the institution. And his first response is irritation. The reflexive, territorial irritation of someone who has claimed a space as theirs and sees someone in that space who they have decided does not belong there. And his second response is opportunity, because James Mitchell has spent 3 years and 2 months learning how to establish and maintain status in the specific hierarchy of the Marine Corps, which is a hierarchy that operates partly through official rank and partly through the unofficial currency of respect and fear. And he has learned that one of the ways to establish and maintain that currency is through the strategic application of aggression toward targets that cannot or will not effectively resist, which is not a noble thing to have learned, but is a thing that many people learn in many hierarchical institutions. And Bruce Lee, moving through the mess hall in civilian clothes, looking for a place to sit, is a target that James Mitchell's institutional experience has taught him to recognize as available, as someone who can be used to demonstrate authority in front of the men he wants to maintain authority with. And he says something to the men at his table, something about civilians not belonging in Marine mess halls, something that gets the attention of the other men and makes them look where he is looking. And then he stands up from the table with the specific unhurried confidence of someone who is about to do something they have done before and found reliable, leaving his tray on the table, moving toward Bruce Lee, who is still scanning the room for a place to sit, who has not yet noticed James Mitchell moving toward him because he is focused on the practical problem of finding a seat, and is not yet aware that he has become someone else's strategic opportunity. The collision happens near the center of the room, at the specific point where the rows of tables create a natural pathway between the food line and the seating areas. A pathway that is currently crowded with men moving in both directions, some arriving with full trays and some departing with empty ones. And Bruce Lee is moving through this pathway carefully, holding his tray level, navigating the specific chaos of bodies in motion. And James Mitchell approaches from behind and to the right, timing his approach to coincide with a moment when Bruce Lee is stepping between 2 men who are themselves in motion. When Bruce Lee's attention is divided and his body is committed to a specific trajectory, and Mitchell's hand comes forward and makes contact with Bruce Lee's shoulder blade, not a touch, but a shove. The specific forceful palm strike of someone who wants to displace rather than stop. who wants to send a message through the medium of physics, and the force is substantial. The full weight of Mitchell's arm and shoulder behind it, delivered with the specific confidence of someone who believes the target will not effectively respond. And Bruce Lee's body absorbs the impact and begins to move forward in the direction of the shove, his tray tilting, the food on it sliding toward the edge, his feet adjusting to prevent a fall. And for a fraction of a second it appears that he will fall, that the shove has succeeded in its apparent purpose, which is to knock him off balance and onto the floor in front of 240 witnesses. But Bruce Lee's body makes a series of micro-adjustments that happen faster than most people can consciously process. His weight shifting, his knees bending slightly, his core engaging. And instead of falling, he stabilizes, his feet finding new purchase on the linoleum floor, his tray returning to level, the food settling back into place. And he turns to see who has shoved him, turning with the specific controlled quality of someone who is managing their response rather than simply having a response. And he sees James Mitchell standing 3 feet behind him, hand still extended from the shove, and Mitchell is smiling, the specific smile of someone who has just done something they consider amusing and is waiting for the room to confirm their assessment. And the room is confirming it, because the men nearest the collision have stopped eating and stopped talking and are watching to see what happens next, because what just happened is interesting enough to warrant attention, is the beginning of something that might develop into something worth watching. And Bruce Lee looks at James Mitchell with an expression that is not angry and not afraid but simply attentive. The look of someone who is gathering information about a situation before deciding how to respond to it. And Mitchell sees this look and interprets it as weakness, as confirmation that his assessment of Bruce Lee as an available target was correct. And he says, loud enough for the men around them to hear, "Watch where you're going, civilian," which is not an apology and is not a question, but is the specific kind of statement that is designed to establish that what just happened was Bruce Lee's fault rather than Mitchell's, that the person who was shoved is being held responsible for being in the path of the shove. And the men watching register this statement and register Bruce Lee's response to it, which is silence. And silence in a situation like this can be interpreted in many ways, but is most commonly interpreted as acceptance, as the acknowledgement of fault. And Mitchell interprets it this way and takes a step closer to Bruce Lee, closing the distance between them, establishing proximity as another form of dominance. And Bruce Lee does not step back, does not create distance, simply stands with his tray and looks at Mitchell and waits. The mess hall has not gone completely silent, but it has gone quieter. The specific reduction in ambient noise that happens when enough people stop talking simultaneously that the overall volume drops noticeably, when individual conversations pause, because the people having them have directed their attention elsewhere, toward the thing that is happening in the center of the room between the civilian with the tray and the Marine corporal who has just shoved him. And this reduction in noise makes Mitchell's next words more audible than they would otherwise be, makes them carry further through the room, which is exactly what Mitchell wants, because the point of what he is doing is not simply to dominate Bruce Lee, but to dominate Bruce Lee publicly, to establish his dominance in front of witnesses who will remember it and who will adjust their assessment of Mitchell accordingly. And he says, "You don't belong here. Go home." And the statement lands in the room with the specific weight of something that is simultaneously true and not true. True in the sense that Bruce Lee is not a Marine, and this is a Marine mess hall. Not true in the sense that Bruce Lee has been invited here by the base commander and has every right to be here. But the nuance of invitation versus belonging is not a nuance that carries much weight in a room full of young men who are watching one of their own established dominance over someone they have decided is an outsider. And Bruce Lee responds, his voice not raised, but clear enough to be heard by everyone who is listening, which at this point is most of the room. "I was invited by your commander." And this statement changes something in the room's understanding of what is happening, introduces a complication to what had seemed like a simple situation, because the commander's authority is absolute in a way that a corporal's authority is not. And if Bruce Lee is here at the commander's invitation, then Mitchell's assertion that he does not belong here is not just wrong, but is wrong in a way that challenges the commander's judgment, which is not a safe thing to do. But Mitchell either does not understand this complication or has committed himself too completely to the performance to adjust course now. And he laughs, the specific forced laugh of someone who is performing amusement rather than experiencing it, and says, "Commander invites a little Chinese guy? For what? To cook." And the men watching register this statement, and some of them laugh because laughing is the expected response, and going against the expected response requires a kind of courage that most people do not have in moments like this. And some of them do not laugh, because the statement has crossed a line that they recognize as a line, even if they cannot articulate exactly where the line is or why it matters. And Bruce Lee's expression does not change, does not register the insult in any visible way, and he says, "For demonstration, in 2 hours, martial arts." And Mitchell's laugh becomes more genuine because this strikes him as genuinely funny. The idea that this small Chinese man in civilian clothes is going to demonstrate martial arts to Marines, to men who are trained in combat. And he says, "Demonstration of what? Chopsticks?" And the men around him laugh harder because the joke is clearer now, the mockery more explicit. And Bruce Lee sets his tray down on the nearest table with the specific, careful deliberation of someone who is making a decision about what their hands need to be free for. And this action registers with some of the men watching as significant, as the transition from a verbal confrontation to something that might become physical. But Mitchell does not register it as significant because Mitchell has spent 3 years in the Marine Corps and has been in multiple physical confrontations and has won all of them, and has never encountered anyone who he could not dominate through the application of size and aggression. And Bruce Lee is 5 feet 7 inches and maybe 135 pounds, and Mitchell is 6 feet 2 inches and 220 pounds. And the mathematics of this difference seem to Mitchell to be simple and conclusive. Mitchell steps closer, close enough that he is now inside what most people would consider personal space, close enough that his size advantage is maximally visible to everyone watching, and he raises his right hand and puts his index finger against Bruce Lee's chest. Not hard enough to push, but hard enough to make contact. The specific physical punctuation that some people use when they want to emphasize a point through touch. And he says, "This is the Marine Corps. We're real fighters, not movie kung fu." And Bruce Lee looks down at the finger on his chest and then looks up at Mitchell's face and says very quietly, quiet enough that only Mitchell and the men immediately around them can hear, "I respect Marines. Please step back." And the word "please" lands in the situation with strange weight, because it is a word that acknowledges that Mitchell has a choice, that what happens next depends on what Mitchell chooses to do with this moment. And Mitchell has a choice, and he makes it. And his choice is to press his finger harder against Bruce Lee's chest and say, "Or what? You gonna kung fu me?" And his friends laugh, because this is the expected response, the escalation that the performance requires. And Bruce Lee says, still quietly, "I am asking you to step back. This is your last chance." And the word "chance" registers with some of the men watching as a warning, as the thing that people say before something happens. But Mitchell does not hear it as a warning, because Mitchell does not believe that anything Bruce Lee could do would constitute a threat. And he says, "Last chance? You threatening me, civilian?" And he converts the finger on Bruce Lee's chest into a palm, and he pushes. The same kind of shove he delivered earlier, but more forceful, more committed. And Bruce Lee's body moves backward from the force, but his feet do not move. He absorbs the push through his structure and returns to center. And Mitchell sees this and is irritated by it, irritated that the push did not have the effect he wanted, and he reaches forward with both hands to shove again, harder, to get the result he is looking for, which is Bruce Lee on the floor. And his hands move forward toward Bruce Lee's shoulders, and Bruce Lee is no longer where his hands expected him to be, has shifted offline, with the specific minimal displacement of someone who has done this 10,000 times. And Mitchell's hands close on empty air where Bruce Lee's shoulders were supposed to be, and before Mitchell can process this information and adjust, Bruce Lee's right hand moves. Not fast in the sense of speed that looks impressive, but fast in the sense of speed that is functional, that arrives before the target's nervous system can organize a response. And his hand makes contact with Mitchell's extended left wrist, not grabbing, but redirecting, a touch that changes the vector of Mitchell's forward momentum. And simultaneously, Bruce Lee's left leg moves, a sweep that makes contact with Mitchell's right ankle at the exact moment when Mitchell's weight is shifting forward onto that ankle, when the ankle is load-bearing and vulnerable, and the combination of the wrist redirect and the ankle sweep removes all the structural support that is keeping Mitchell upright, removes it so completely and so suddenly that Mitchell does not fall so much as collapse, his body going down without any of the protective mechanisms that normally activate during a fall, because those mechanisms require time to activate, and the time between standing and floor is too brief for activation. And he lands on the linoleum flat on his back with the specific authoritative sound of substantial mass meeting solid surface, and the entire sequence from Mitchell reaching forward to Mitchell on the floor takes 6 seconds. And for those 6 seconds, the mess hall has been loud with conversation, and the clatter of trays, and the ambient noise of 240 men eating. And then Mitchell hits the floor, and the mess hall goes completely silent. The specific shocked silence of a room full of people who have just witnessed something that does not fit their understanding of how things work, who have just seen their established hierarchy challenged in a way that succeeded. And the silence holds for 3 full seconds, which is a very long time for 240 people to be completely silent. And then the sound returns gradually, not all at once, but in pieces. Someone setting down a fork, someone clearing their throat. The specific, cautious resumption of activity that happens when people are not sure if what just happened is finished happening. Commander William Hayes enters the mess hall at 12:14, which is 6 minutes after Bruce Lee entered and 7 minutes after the scheduled start of his own lunch, entering through the side door that connects to the officer's country. And he enters because Sergeant Morrison found him in his office and told him there was a situation in the mess hall that required his attention. And Hayes knows that Morrison is not someone who uses the phrase "requires your attention" lightly, which means the situation is significant. And he enters the mess hall and immediately sees what the situation is, sees Corporal Mitchell on the floor and Bruce Lee standing over him and 240 Marines completely silent and watching. And Hayes has been in the Marine Corps for 22 years and has seen many situations and has developed the specific ability to read a room's atmosphere and understand what has happened in it, even without having witnessed what happened, and he reads this room and understands that Mitchell has done something stupid and has received an education, and his first response is irritation, not at Bruce Lee, but at Mitchell, because Hayes personally invited Bruce Lee to this base to conduct a demonstration for his Marines, invited him because Hayes saw Bruce Lee fight in Long Beach in 1964 and understood that what he was watching was something his Marines needed to see, needed to understand existed. And Mitchell has just attacked Hayes's invited guest, has just created an incident that could have resulted in injury to that guest. And Hayes is irritated in the specific way that commanding officers are irritated when their subordinates create unnecessary problems through unnecessary aggression. And he walks to the center of the room where Bruce Lee is standing, and Mitchell is still on the floor. And he says, "Mr. Lee, I apologize for this incident." And Bruce Lee turns to face him and says, "No apology necessary, Commander. A misunderstanding." And Hayes appreciates the grace of this response, appreciates that Bruce Lee is offering him a way to resolve this without official consequences. But Hayes is also aware that 240 Marines just watched one of their corporals attack a civilian guest and get put on the floor in 6 seconds, and this is a teaching moment that is too valuable to waste on face-saving. And he looks down at Mitchell, who is now sitting up, looking dazed and embarrassed. And Hayes says, loud enough for the room to hear, "Corporal Mitchell, you just attacked our guest instructor, the man who is here at my invitation to teach you about martial arts. Do you understand what you have done?" And Mitchell's face, which was already red from exertion and embarrassment, goes a shade darker, and he says, "Sir, I didn't know." And Hayes cuts him off. "You didn't know because you didn't ask. You assumed. And your assumption just put you on the floor of my mess hall in front of your entire unit. Stand up." And Mitchell stands, slowly, and Hayes says, "The demonstration is at 1400 hours. You will attend. Front row. And you will pay attention. Dismissed." And Mitchell walks away, not quite limping but moving carefully. And the mess hall is still silent, still watching. And Hayes turns to Bruce Lee and says, "The demonstration is still on, I hope." And Bruce Lee smiles, the first smile anyone in the room has seen from him, and says, "Of course, Commander, I am looking forward to it." And Hayes nods and leaves the same way he entered. And the mess hall remains silent for another few seconds, and then sound returns, cautiously at first, and then fully, conversations resuming, trays being moved, the normal ambient noise of 240 men eating lunch. But the normal is different now, is normal that has been informed by what just happened, and Bruce Lee picks up his tray from the table where he set it down and finds a seat at a table where space has suddenly appeared, where men have made space for him, and he sits and eats his lunch in silence, while around him 240 Marines eat theirs and think about what they just saw and what it means and what they will see in 2 hours when the demonstration begins. At 1400 hours, the base gymnasium is full, not 240 Marines, but closer to 400, because word has spread in the specific way that word spreads through military installations, through mess halls and berthing areas and smoke breaks. The story of what happened at lunch, traveling from person to person and growing slightly with each telling but retaining its essential truth, which is that a small Chinese man put Corporal Mitchell on the floor in 6 seconds, and everyone who heard the story wants to see what else this small Chinese man can do, wants to see if what happened at lunch was luck or skill, anomaly or demonstration of something real. And the gymnasium has been set up with mats in the center and chairs arranged in rows around the mats. And the front row is occupied by Mitchell and the 5 men who were sitting with him at lunch, all of them present not by choice, but by order, and behind them are row after row of Marines, some standing because there are not enough chairs, all of them talking in the specific anticipatory buzz of people waiting for something they expect to be interesting. and Commander Hayes enters at 13:58, and the room comes to attention automatically, and Hayes says, "Seats, gentlemen. We are here for a demonstration by Mr. Bruce Lee, who some of you met at lunch." And the room registers this statement with a ripple of laughter, acknowledges the reference to what happened, and Hayes continues, "Mr. Lee is a martial artist, not a military martial arts instructor, not a hand-to-hand combat trainer, a martial artist. What he is going to show you is not what we teach in the Corps, but it is real, and it is effective, and you will pay attention." And then Hayes gestures to the side door, and Bruce Lee enters, wearing a black kung fu uniform, now instead of civilian clothes, moving onto the mats in the center of the gymnasium, and the room goes quiet again. The same quality of quiet it achieved when Mitchell hit the floor, the quiet of focused attention, and Bruce Lee stands in the center of the mats and looks at the 400 faces looking back at him, and he says, his voice carrying easily through the gymnasium, "I am going to show you some things, but first I need a volunteer. Someone strong. Someone who thinks what happened in the mess hall was lucky." And he looks directly at the front row, directly at Mitchell, and says, "Corporal Mitchell, please join me." And Mitchell hesitates for half a second, considers refusing, but refusing in front of 400 Marines is not an option. And he stands and walks onto the mats. And Bruce Lee says, "Attack me. Any way you want. Use your training. Try to hit me." And Mitchell looks at Commander Hayes, who nods, giving permission, and Mitchell turns back to Bruce Lee and raises his hands, and what happens next is not a fight, but an education. Is Bruce Lee demonstrating in slow motion and then full speed? How to read an attack before it happens. How to be where the attack is not. How to redirect force rather than oppose it. How to use an opponent's commitment against them. And Mitchell attacks 7 times in 7 different ways, and 7 times Bruce Lee is not there when the attack arrives, is somewhere else, somewhere that allows him to touch Mitchell lightly on the back or the shoulder or the head. Touches that could have been strikes, but are demonstrations of access. Demonstrations that if Bruce Lee wanted to hurt Mitchell, he could have done so 7 times. And after the 7th demonstration, Mitchell is breathing hard and Bruce Lee is not. And Bruce Lee says, "Thank you, Corporal," and Mitchell returns to his seat, and Bruce Lee spends the next 90 minutes showing 400 Marines things they have never seen, demonstrating speed and precision and economy of movement that redefines what they thought was possible. And when the demonstration ends at 15:30, the gymnasium is completely silent for 5 full seconds before someone in the back starts clapping, and then everyone is clapping, 400 Marines on their feet applauding, and Bruce Lee bows and leaves the same way he entered. And the Marines file out of the gymnasium talking about what they just saw. And Corporal Mitchell walks back to his barracks in silence, thinking about the mess hall and the gymnasium and the specific lesson that he has learned today, which is that strength is not size and skill is not aggression, and the world is larger and more complex than the Marine Corps has taught him. And he will remember this lesson for the rest of his life. Will tell the story of the day he pushed Bruce Lee to his children and his grandchildren. Will tell it as the story of the day he learned that what you assume about a person based on how they look is almost always wrong. And the story will become part of the base's history, part of the oral tradition that gets passed from unit to unit. The story of the day. A small Chinese man in civilian clothes came to Miramar and changed what 400 Marines understood about fighting and respect, and the specific difference between what you think you know and what is actually true.